My name is Janu Park, and I'm the Executive Director of the DC Criminal Code Reform Commission. Today I'm going to talk about the Revised Criminal Code Act of 2022, and specifically one of the most important improvements that the Act will bring to the district, and that is a dramatic improvement in terms of how clearly our criminal code defines the scope of criminal conduct. Let's start with a brief discussion of culpable mental states. Culpable mental states are a fundamental component of criminal liability. Criminal offenses require more than just causing some harm in the world. It requires causing some harm in the world with some requisite bad state of mind. The current code doesn't define any culpable mental states. So you look through the code, statutes either won't specify that any culpable mental state applies at all, or they'll use some vague, poorly defined terms like willfully, wantonly, or with malice aforethought. And to get a sense of what these terms actually mean requires doing a lot of time-consuming research into District of Columbia Court of Appeals case law and reading through voluminous, complex cases. By contrast, the Revised Criminal Code Act defines four main culpable mental states. So a person can act purposely, that is, they act with conscious desire. They can act knowingly, so whether or not they desired the bad outcome, they acted with a practical certainty that it would result. They can act recklessly, that is, they consciously disregard a substantial risk of causing a particular outcome, or they can act negligently, that is, they created a risk that they were not aware of, but they should have been aware of. And finally, strict liability can apply, which simply means that no culpable mental state is required. So the RCCA uses these culpable mental states and to clearly define each offense. And just to illustrate some of the improvements, let's compare the current manslaughter statute to the manslaughter statute under the RCCA. If you look to our current code and you look to the current manslaughter statute, what you'll find is that it literally says nothing about what is required for the offense. It simply says that whoever is guilty of manslaughter shall be sentenced to a period of imprisonment not exceeding 30 years. It only provides a penalty. It doesn't provide a culpable mental state at all. It doesn't even state whether manslaughter requires causing the death of another person. You can compare this to the RCCA's definition of involuntary manslaughter, in which it succinctly states that an actor commits involuntary manslaughter when the actor recklessly causes the death of another person. Again, recklessly being a statutorily defined term, which here would require that the defendant consciously disregarded a substantial risk that they would cause the death of another person. Now, the RCCA doesn't just improve the clarity by listing out all the elements of the offenses and using those statutorily defined culpable mental states. The RCCA also adopts an innovation brought about by the model penal code, which is to abandon what was known as offense analysis in favor of element analysis. Now, under offensive analysis, courts and lawmakers would try to apply a single culpable mental state to an offense as a whole. So, for example, when the DC Court of Appeals refers to an offense as being a specific intent offense or a general intent offense, they're applying offensive analysis. But offensive analysis has some significant flaws. So first, the terms general and specific intent are not clearly defined, but more importantly, very often we actually want to apply different culpable mental states to different elements of a particular offense. So, for example, the DC Court of Appeals has said that theft is a specific intent offense. It requires that a person specifically intend to steal property of another. But felony theft requires that the property stolen is valued at $1,000 or more. And despite being a specific intent offense, the DC Court of Appeals has said that there's no mental state required as to the value of the property. So we can use theft as an example of how the RCCA adopts element analysis. That is not just to list out the specific elements of the offense and to apply culpable mental states, but our drafting conventions allow us to apply a particular mental state to each individual offense element of the offense. So here is just an example, is a somewhat simplified version of our theft statute. And it states that an actor commits first-degree theft when the actor knowingly takes the property of another without the consent of an owner, and in fact, the property has a value of $500,000 or more. So again, knowingly is a statutorily defined term, which requires practical certainty. So here, the defendant would have had to have been practically certain that they were taking property. They also had to be certain that the property belonged to another person. We also have rules of interpretation in the RCCA that specify that culpable mental states apply to subsequent elements. So here, that knowingly mental state would also apply to the element under 2, that the defendant would have had to know that they acted without the consent of the owner when they took the property. Finally, we have this term, in fact, which under the code specifies that no culpable mental state applies to the subsequent element. So here, the statute makes clear that strict liability as it applies as to the value of the property. There's no complemental state required as to whether or not the property was valued at $500,000 or more. So by using statutorily defined complemental states, by clearly listing out each element of the offense and using this element analysis approach, which allows us to apply particular complemental states to particular elements of the offense, the RCCA dramatically improves the clarity with which criminal offenses are defined. And this is really the core foundational improvement that the RCCA makes as compared to the current district code.